This is book talk number 4. It's today we're going to be talking to Jack Skelley, Venice poet, L.A. poet, and he was important, integral to the Beyond Baroque reading series, Beyond Baroque, the institution, and Venice, and all that. And yeah, Jack Skelley, his book, he has a book, Monsters, on Little Caesars Press, and then he also published From Fear of Kathy Acker and More Fear of Kathy Acker on Illuminati Press. Those books came out mostly in the 80s, but recently he released a book called Dennis Wilson and Charles Manson on Fred and Barney Press. He was also the publisher of the magazine Barney that came out in the early 80s. It had all the Beyond Baroque poets, the gang as we call them, and he was also in the psychedelic surf band Lawndale, which was on SST Records. And I discovered a lot of these Venice poets firsthand through the Bill Moore anthology Poetry Loves Poetry, which came out like in 86 or 87. And I still have my copy here today. It was on Momentum Press, and Exene and John Doe were in there, Michael Lally, Suzanne Loomis, a lot of the poets at the time, Gerald Laughlin, who taught at Long Beach State. So today we're going to talk about Beyond Baroque, poetry in LA over the last 40 years, and the relationship. They seem to have a connection to Long Beach, so we'll get into that. And there's also, I recommend, there's a film on YouTube. You can watch the whole thing, I think, most of it, part of it. It's called Fear of Poetry. They did it like in 83. So that's a good documentation of the people we're talking about. All these people, I mean, Amy Gersler and David Trinidad, Elena Quee, and some of the people we're going to be talking about today are kind of nationally known poets now, and they're taught in colleges and read by poets everywhere. So we're gonna talk, and but we're gonna focus on today in Jack Skelley's new book, and it's and his book is on my best of 2021 books of the year. So let's call up Jack Skelley and we'll talk to him. Okay, we're back with Jack Skelley, the author of Dennis Wilson and Charles Manson on Fred and Barney Press. And I mean, I think there's been all these kind of recounts of the 70s and 80s in LA, the poetry scene, the art scene. And I mean, my recollection of that time is it was like as kind of dark and bleak as like, New York City, just it was just kind of in pockets. So if you were somewhere in the suburbs and maybe you didn't see that kind of dark side of LA so much, and it was pretty scary, especially if you were, downtown LA was very scary, when they had the Greyhound station over on 7th Street. And the first time I went to Hollywood Boulevard, and I mean Sunset and La Cuenca, there was like prostitutes on the street and stuff. Like what was your take on LA at that time when you were starting all these presses, like the background, and you were located in Culver City in Venice back then?
Yeah, I was based in Venice for quite a long time. I lived in Venice, and I worked in Venice at Beyond Baroque Literary Arts Center, where a lot of this activity that you're talking about, kind of the people are talking about now again, happened. But, I mean, yeah, there was a seedy side to LA, I guess, for sure, Venice was kind of part of that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Did you know Arnold Springer back then? The Professor Arnold Springer, the history professor?
I did not, but I know his name.
Oh, okay.
Where was he at?
Well, he was, I mean, I guess he was kind of a known figure in Venice, but he taught at Long Beach State.
That's right, yeah.
And he was like, he used to wear dresses, and he was real straight guy, and real like suits and tie guy. And then when he got tenure, he just became like a full on hippie, and he started wearing dresses and makeup and stuff.
Right.
So I think he's still around. But okay, so it's great that you're talking to me today, because I've already covered. I did a show about Grove Press and Barney Rossett, and I did one show about San Francisco poets and the Cafe Babar, and so even before that, there was in the 70s and early 80s. I mean, back then, I think the big poets in my mind were like Charles Bukowski and Wanda Coleman, and then the Beats were kind of like off the radar a little bit. That was probably, the 70s were probably like the least popular time for the Beats. They were kind of like already done, and they kind of made a little bit of a comeback in the 80s and early 90s. But and then so I noticed there was a connection between Venice, Beyond Baroque, Long Beach, the South Bay, and you're from Torrance. I mean, Bob Flanagan went to Long Beach State. He even went to high school in Costa Mesa High, and then so I found out all about you because when I was going to Long Beach State, and we had modern poetry classes where I found this book, Poetry Loves Poetry, and that was being taught in Long Beach State in the mid 80s, and Gerald Laughlin was there, and back then, I mean, not only there was a scene. I mean, I don't think there was there a scene before the Beyond Baroque scene, or it didn't seem like there was.
In Venice, you mean?
Well, I mean, yeah, there was the Ferris Gallery, but there was. I mean, when I think of a scene, I think of like New York Poetry Project or something like that.
Yeah.
Where there's more kind of a nexus where poets can kind of come together. Definitely. Or in San Francisco, they had the Sixth Gallery, or the Berkeley Renaissance, and
right.
I just think my take on it was like there was Bukowski, who was kind of like his own thing, and Wanda Coleman was kind of another interesting person, but they might have did some readings together, but it wasn't like they were hanging out or anything, or hanging out at bars or anything.
I know what you're saying. So here's what I would say about that. That in starting with the 80s, I mean, of course, my viewpoint is completely skewered to me, but it was more of a local scene. So there were individual pockets of local scenes, and even the overall LA literary scene was very local. It was very much local writers, very Los Angeles writers writing to each other, and to some degree hanging out. But maybe there wasn't a lot of cross-pollination, like you're saying. Then what happened was there was kind of as part of the explosion of the 1980s lit scene and music scene and art scene, which I guess we're going to get into, much of which centered around Beyond Baroque, there was an expansion of the LA scene itself and a connection with other cities. So you saw people like Dennis Cooper, who had a huge impact on all of this, not only strengthening and emboldening the local literary art music scene. He was more focused on literary and art in Venice, but also he made great strides in connecting with the New York poets and other poets around the country. So there was a huge sort of national level almost flowering based in LA.
Right. Yeah, so there was Beyond Baroque. I mean, Owl's Bar was happening pretty early. There was the Lace Gallery. There was a lot of readings at the Works Gallery in Long Beach, and Bob Flanagan was living in Long Beach. Why was there so much things going on in Long Beach, like outside of LA? Would you say? Right.
Yeah, Bob was a very good friend of mine. We collaborated on many projects, including we had a band together called Planet of Toys. And he was based in Long Beach for a long time. I mean, I was not, but I know he went to school there, and he knew the Long Beach sort of established poets. Robert Peters and Gerald Laughlin, I guess, were some of them.
Yeah.
And there was a great bookstore there, Chelsea Books, where we performed. And so there definitely was a Long Beach scene. I was not part of it. But like you were saying at the beginning, Alex, I mean, there's kind of like a connection between Long Beach and then San Pedro, or Pedro, as we call it, up through the South Bay and into Venice. A sort of creative continuum there.
Yeah, cause like a lot of, there was that Dancing Waters club there, and
Hmm.
there was some of the Pedro bands, and there was always, the poetry scene kind of seemed like the same people that were maybe in the, not the L.A. mass scene, but maybe like the later kind of like the Starwood and some of the other clubs, and there was like Club Lhasa and the Anti Club, and
Right.
there was illegal downtown clubs like the Red Dog and
Yes.
and
That was great.
Madame Wong's and some of that stuff. And so
Yeah.
so there was, when we get to 81, 82, there was more kind of like the same people that were in the poetry scene were also guys that were in the audience for the punk rock gigs back in the
And
day.
there was a total cross pollination between art, music, and literature, and it was, it probably is now today to do. I try to keep up on what everybody's doing now too, but it was definitely very, very fertile during that time. And so, like you said, yeah, people who were writers would have bands. People who had bands would have writers. Were writers. So I had my own band, Lawndale, which I still have. And my girlfriend had a great band, Animal Dance. She was a really good writer. Is still Robin Carr. So you see that all up and down. X. Take a look at X.
Yeah.
They met at Beyond Baroque. John Doe and Exene, right? They actually met in the Beyond Baroque workshop, where I actually lived as well. So it's crazy how much interaction there was.
Yeah, also I was thinking about talking to you today, and I think like when I go to readings nowadays, it just seems like people are kind of doing this therapeutic thing, and compared to back then, everybody was in some kind of writing class, or
Mm-hmm.
there was always like a lot more emphasis on workshop and working at your poetry,
Right.
a lot of drafts. Then you would get people that were more interested in printing presses and
Mm-hmm.
different things. It just seems like there's not a lot of, when you go to readings nowadays, like, I went a couple years ago, before the pandemic.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like there's a lot of, things aren't really workshop. These people aren't really coming from creative writing places, and
Right.
they're not. It's not. There's no music there. There's no. They don't even read poetry. It's just like they
Right, they don't study it. Yeah, I got you. I think you're generalizing, but I think you're probably right. You know what I mean? Like, I think that, especially with the terms of the cross pollination, like we were saying,
yeah.
where there's a lot of back and forth. And I think that has to do with whatever the atomization of the culture, sort of the loss of sort of a salon type or court type, situation where people really met in person a lot.
Yeah.
Where they don't as much anymore. Everything's online now.
Yeah.
But that said, I also will say that there is a very vibrant indie literature press scene happening now that did not happen then, which was made possible by the internet. So there's a lot of really good, and not just the internet, but also there's some very good book publishing going on right now. Again, among what we would extensions of the scene from those days, basically, independent writers.
Right. Yeah. And I think instead of the internet back then, people. You mentioned Chelsea Books. The Beyond
Mm-hmm.
Baroque had a bookstore.
Yeah.
I found acres of books. There was a great bookstore in San Pedro. I bought my first William Burroughs and a Celine book. When Hollywood Boulevard used to have all these great bookstores around Hollywood and Wilcox. That was where you would go there and find like something like Louis Ferdinand Celine. There's some weird book that you can buy at the mall bookstores, which kind of like were all around back then, and they didn't really have.
So they're still there though. They're just not the same ones. There's some of them ones that are the same. But I agree, there was more then. There's more of it now. But now you have Stories Books, in Echo Park.
Yeah.
There's a new bookstore in Echo Park called Despair. You still got Skylight Books. Beyond Baroque is still a bookstore. There's some really good ones out there.
No, I'm just saying. I was. Up until 86, 87, I was really not. I didn't really read like a living writer. I didn't even know people were writing besides like Kurt Vonnegut or somebody. And then I go to Chelsea Books or Beyond Baroque, and I really read a lot of the guys from Beyond Baroque. I read when I got to San Francisco in 1989, and I would go to Small Press Traffic, and you'd have all those books. Like I remember seeing A Taste of Honey there, and
David Trinidad.
and and Bob Flanagan's book, and
Yeah.
Monsters was there,
That's my book, right?
and then a lot of the Hahnemann books were there. So I would see a lot of those books, and I
Yeah.
go, oh yeah, these guys are from the, because I would go as an audience member and go to the readings, and I think I remember one time. Did you ever open up for read with Kenward Elmsley or something back in?
Yeah, a couple times.
Yeah, because I remember one time they introduced you and they said, "Oh, here's the author of Fear of Kathy Acker and More Fear," and just that opening, that introduction was like got a laugh, because here's the guy that writes a lot about Kathy Acker. But we'll get to Kathy Acker in a second.
Okay.
I got a question about that, but yeah, I mean, what's great about these people like Sabrina Tarasoff and the Hammer Museum can come along and like look and focus on them, 40 years ago, because you and Dennis and David Trinidad and the Fear of Poetry movie. I mean, you guys did a really great job of saving stuff and curation and finding all these interesting people that were kind of, there was Barney magazine, there was Little Caesar magazine, Bill Maher's Poetry Loves Poetry is still is kind of like that New York Poets book by Don Allen. It's a real good landmark. I mean, it should be more available to people, and you get the gang poets from and then you get the older guys like Dennis and yourself, like looked at the around and they go, okay, well, there's Joe Laughlin, he's interesting, Robert Peters, Michael Lally, Ron Coder, and others, Suzanne Loomis, all these, and you go, okay, we want them, and we're gonna publish them, we're gonna publish ourselves and put them in a magazine and stuff, and you Dennis made a connection to New York, and there was the St. Mark's Poetry Project was probably the biggest one, and I remember seeing Elaine Equi at the Ear Inn in '91 one time.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, I was just kind of wondering, like, how you found, that was all Dennis. How did you find these guys so fast? I mean, because like back then there was no internet, so you had to actually, do the footwork, so to speak.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. First of all, you kind of mentioned kind of like the Sabrina Tarasoff exhibit at the Hammer. She's this artist that this year, it closed this year, was part of the Made in LA exhibit. Went back and sort of reanimated the spirit of Beyond Baroque, if not sort of the documents from it, in a walk-through haunted house exhibit sponsored by the Hammer Museum and the Huntington Museum. So to me, that validates everything that happened at that time, which, like you said, Alice, was a explosion of printing, publishing, readings, and just outreach amongst these different groups. How do we find them? I mean, again, I do have to credit Dennis Cooper. I mean, you just got it, because he was very well read, right? He already had connection with these New York writers, and then a lot of descend from the great New York School of Writing and Poetry stuff. So he made that and other connections for us. And then, but we're all into it. Well, like you said, we all had our presses, individual. We published each other in our own, try to always looking for new voices. Always super jazzed about discovering. Oh, look at what this person did. Oh, here's a new person. Here's a great new writer. Ed Smith. Came out of nowhere, sort of thing. But also some of the longtime writers from LA were sort of folded into that family. I love to publish even old, more later timers or whatever, as Harry Northup. Writes amazing poetry, So there's definitely Jim Crusoe he had already been there. It's a fantastic writer. So we tried to find the best of everything and just expand that group and encourage that group.
Right. And I mean, as a personal thing, I've always been interested in typesetting, and I remember because I knew a few people that worked in typesetting, and that kind of, even in colleges at like Cal Arts and New College, they still kind of did typesetting, and you can like typeset your own poetry books and stuff. And like, do you remember exactly when it went from like the real typesetting and big boards to to PageMaker and computers? Do you remember when it kind of switched over? And
Well, it's so funny that you ask about that, because one of my jobs at Beyond Baroque, when I worked at Beyond Baroque from 1979 to 1984, I think, one of my jobs, aside from taking out the trash and producing the music series, was the New Comp Graphic Center Supervisor, which was basically the typesetting operation at Beyond Baroque, which was through the grants of the time, NEA and stuff like that, California Arts Council, subsidized publications, magazines and books, independent magazines and book and publishers. So that included this typesetting operation, which I was in charge. So I would teach all these poets, hey, here's how you typeset your book. Some of them got it quicker than others. But that was done, I mean, you ask about when it changed over. That was still when you would print out long galleys and paste them up, yeah. But the fact that I worked in this graphic center that it gave me access to typesetting just totally encouraged my sort of perverse desire to publish weird shit. So I started, producing chapbooks of my own, and then other people. Then I started my own magazine, Barney, et cetera, et cetera. So it made it very smooth and easy for somebody like me to start publishing.
Yeah, so I mean, we talked about Exene and John Doe. I know Dennis. There's pictures of him like at Ramones concerts, like in the '70s and stuff.
Yeah.
And Bob Flanagan, he seemed kind of like punk rock, kind of when I first met him. Like he seemed a little kind of like from that era. Were Amy Gersler and everybody like part of the punk scene, or were they into different stuff, or what was the crossover there?
I mean, some of us were more punk. None of us were hardcore.
Okay.
But some of us were more into the punk rock. But we were all into music, and we would all go to shows all the time. Dennis and myself and Amy and Bob Flanagan and Michael Silverblatt, who's still active at the Bookworm show. We would go to the Whiskey or all the clubs all the time to see new bands. The Whiskey A Go Go was the place where all the where a band that was from England or from New York or something, if they were on tour for the first time in the country, that's where they played. So, but yes, we're into the creative side of, there's just a complete freeing, free your ass and your mind will follow, or whatever George Clinton said. The same thing with punk rock, right? It was like, it was just an explosively creative time that was completely intersected with the punk rock scene.
I think I remember seeing Bob Flanagan at the Roxy, like maybe like very early '80s or something, like before I knew he was even involved in Beyond Baroque. I definitely met Don Bowles early on. I remember, because
Don Bowles, sure,
yeah.
From the Germs originally. He still plays.
Yeah. He's still around. So, I wanted to ask you about your like influences, like, because when I read Monsters and Poetry Loves Poetry, like it kind of reminds me of Frank O'Hara, Kenward Elmsley, a lot of the New York school guys, and then I listened to that interview you did with Michael Silverblatt, and he compared you to the early William Blake, and so what do you think your enablers are, like? Because I can never figure it out. I mean,
I love that kind of question. It's like, oh, what are your influences? It's like I get to talk about myself, and what I love, which is, yes, definitely the New York school still does that kind of I do this, I do that, Frank O'Hara kind of poem, which is just a really fun type of poem to write. It's a way of kind of writing personal poetry without being self-indulgent or confessional or whatever. But then I also was you mentioned William Blake. I studied the Romantics. I'm just a freaking romantic anyway. I studied the English Romantics heavily and the American. And that has definitely influenced in my writing. I love to try to pervert, these older forms into new forms and into new subject matter. So those are definitely two big. William Blake is big because he's just focused on an entire mythology, which I'm totally into, sort of pop mythology and pop icons, and how mythology eternal, ancient mythology filters down into the everyday today with today's pop stars, for example. So Blake for sure, yeah.
Yeah, well, Blake, yeah, I went to. I was in London about 2 years ago, and I went to there was a William Blake exhibit there, and they
Yeah, the bicentennial or something, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and they had got to see a lot of that stuff firsthand over at the
Incredible.
Tate Britain,
He,
and Blake was somebody that, even though he's like this kind of fantastic, like visionary poet person, he never he only like went like 10 blocks in each direction like his whole life in
I
London.
know.
He never went
Such
anywhere.
a strange character. There's a whole new book. The interesting way Blake only grows, though, too, Alex. You know, actually reminds me of Kathy Acker, which I know we're going to talk about in a minute. Like some of these people that weren't really quite recognized in their own time. With Blake, we're talking about 200 years now. Just seem to be more and more relevant.
Yeah, Blake. Yeah, a lot, I mean, that's the thing with poets though, like Blake and Keats and Edgar Allan Poe
Yeah.
got popular in the '60s when people kind of rediscovered them, in a
Right.
way, and
Blake was definitely rediscovered. Yeah.
so
You know, the Doors. I mean, the whole Aldous Huxley, the whole thing.
so we were talking about pop icons and stuff, and you guys were all almost like 10 years older than me, so when I was like, when you were kind of doing this, when you were like started this in '81, I was like, or not, well,
Yeah.
you guys, Dennis is like, I've interviewed Dennis a few times, and he's like 10 years older than me. You guys are all close to Dennis's age, and like, I remember back in the '60s when I first went to like Catholic school, Catholic in '65, or, well, no, not that I went there then, maybe like '68, '69 was still sort of had a hold on people, like Catholic Christianity, and then like Time magazine did some kind of cover article like, "Is God Dead?"
I remember that.
And it seemed like in the '70s, like God, especially in Southern California, God, it wasn't very. It was very secular and stuff. You kind of look at pictures, school pictures of people in the '60s, and everyone still looks like the '50s, And then you look at all of a sudden you look at '72, and everybody's like a little hippie, All of a sudden,
Right.
everything got kind of weird, and then so I kind of, I just think of that as like I think things became more secular, less religion. It definitely a lot of things converging in the thing. So, you talk about, with Marie Osmond. You talked about a little bit about the dissolution of mythology or religion, in my view, and archetypes into everyday gods.
Mm-hmm.
And when I think of Marie Osmond, whenever I kind of wrote about more pop stuff in my own work, like when I wrote about Marsha Brady or Audrey Hepburn, or I just didn't know where to go with kind of the narration, so I kind of added a kind of a chapter about Alphaville, the movie, or something else like that. Like I would just, or Twin Peaks. I had a part of my Audrey Hepburn thing kind of goes into this Twin Peaks section, kind of,
Right.
and just kind of like just goes into this other world, because I didn't know how to advance something, so I used, like people like born in the '50s and '60s were just had like the heavy dose of television, and television shows, and and then there's another thing, because I grew up with this Danny Butch, who was Spike Fonzarelli in the Happy Days thing. So he was like a friend of mine, and my brother went to school with Willie Ames from Eight Is Enough, and Sandy West went to that same high school and stuff from the Runaways. So we had like this kind of television. All of us like living in California like had definitely like this direct like 6 degrees separation from kind of like television stars and pop culture. We knew somebody that was on television like when we were growing up and stuff. So it was kind of a weird kind of world and you don't really notice it till you live in New York or San Francisco like I did, as an adult, and and people kind of like look at California as this weird place, and they think like LA and San Francisco are like right next to each other.
Right.
But yeah, okay. Well, if somebody wants to, you want to write a poem like to Marie Osmond. You wrote this like a long time ago, almost 40 years ago, and I mean, how did you come about writing about that? And can you talk about that poem?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, to Marie Osmond, which is this, Keatsian ode, sort of, that I wrote way back then. It's been probably my most anthologized poem. I think it's been in like 5, 6, 7 different anthologies. It was in Harper's and stuff like that. People really gravitate to that poem, and I love it too. But it's part of like this my thing of trying to sort of bring these ancient archetypes, these sort of eternal myths into sort of the present day context with a lot of humor. So, and I think there's a lot of advantage. You recognize that there's a lot of, you've done it a lot. There's a lot of advantages to using that subject matter. For one thing, again, it kind of takes it out of the personal realm. It's just the purely personal realm. Everyone knows who these certain TV stars are or movie stars. I still write about movies, So, and so that makes it a little more broader in its appeal, hopefully, if one's doing it right. But then, if you can kind of connect it to this larger universe of ideas and archetypes, like I use that word, pop archetypes, pop icons, it should come circle back to a personal meaning, because all those things have personal meanings. Mythology is a quest myth, and the search for identity, and the eternal feminine, like Goethe would say. So I think that maybe there's a way that approach can kind of cover a lot of bases.
Right, and and like very few people are going to even know when you ode to Grecian urn is, or what you're talking about when you talk about that.
Well, that's true. Well, everyone knows that John Keats wrote those odes, right?
Oh yeah. Well, I think less and less.
Well, goddamn it, they need to read those.
Yeah. He's good. I mean, he only wrote a few things, but
Yeah.
So and it just it's like now there's like fan fiction, and there's a lot of stuff that people can hang their hat on and stuff and do that.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so Marie Osmond. Yeah, I remember. Yeah, I guess that's been in a lot of anthologies.
Totally.
Yeah.
Many different ones. Yeah.
Okay, so another. Yeah, I mean, and I mean, we're also writing. We're also talking about writing that's after Warhol and Jeff Koons and people like that, and and there's like that's kind of going on in the art world, I mean Warhol's one of the most influential artists I think in the last 50 years.
It totally popped.
Yeah, and and he saw himself as an abstract artist, kind of, as a conceptualist, really, in that way, and So getting to Kathy Acker. Okay, so like when I first heard about Kathy Acker, I mean, she seemed like this punk rock writer or something. So I was like on board. I'm going, okay, who is this person? and then I soon after I found out that I read about it in some magazine. I go, oh, and then Jack Skelley wrote this Fear of Kathy Acker, and I was like, oh, I definitely got to meet this person, Kathy Acker. and then I took a class with her in '91 and. It was mentioned. I got a little paragraph in the Chris Kraus book.
It's so great! That's a wonderful book too. You're so fortunate to have been able to know her.
Yeah, and I got to hang out. Me and Kathy one time went to go see a Dario Argento movie at the.
Wow!
And and she, like we said, I told you before, she used to hang out. She used to, if things got too stiff, she would like play NWA or Nine Inch Nails in the class, or she would take us. She didn't want to meet in the classroom. She wanted to meet in a bar nearby in North Beach, San Francisco. And
wasn't she the one that I think you and I talked about that? But she encouraged her students to masturbate while they did their writing.
I don't know. She might have done that, but I don't know. I don't think it was. I don't know if you can get away with that. But she probably said something like that's how she did. I mean, I wrote a whole kind of.
She did for sure, yes.
Yeah, she's tried to write with with a vibrator or something.
Yeah.
Did you? I mean, you said that you might have like a postcard, or did you have any direct experiences with her, or did you have any kind of writing exchange or anything?
So I wrote a novel called Fear of Kathy Acker, which was published in installments in chapbooks in Illuminati Press in the 80s. Fear of Kathy Acker and more Fear of Kathy Acker. And, this is where I should definitely plug that Semiotext is going to publish, finally, the entire novel, Fear of Kathy Acker, in 2023.
Great.
So, but yes, I did write this novel. It was definitely inspired by Kathy Acker. I'm not saying it's like it's all about Kathy Acker or, isn't Kathy Acker's style. Some of it is. But it was more inspired by her just anything goes approach to writing. Like, what the hell? You can do it's just reading that stuff just takes you in 10 different directions at once. I think it's totally influential to today's what they call new narrative writers.
Yeah.
But anyway, I never met her in person. That's why I'm jealous of you, man. But she did I did send her the book at the time, and I also sent her like a radio show where I read, parts of it, and she got back to me. If she she was mad. She wrote this postcard. She didn't say mad. She wrote this postcard saying basically, "What the fuck? How could you do this?" kind of thing. But then she said, "Then I read your work, and she said you're really a good writer. Never what's expected." So she said, "That's all great. Thank you." So are you kidding? That just made my whole life, not just my day. So that was my sole interaction with Kathy Acker.
Well, there was that one book. I think it's called like "Hello, I'm Erica Jong" by Kathy Acker. Was that like an influence on your title or something?
Yes, right. So okay, look, Erica Jong, as you know, she wrote a very huge paperback called "Fear of Flying," which is actually kind of an interesting book. It's all about female, sort of liberating sexuality for women at the time in the 70s. And then, so Fear of Flying was written by Erica Jong, and then Kathy Acker wrote this sort of funny, sort of mock book called "Hello, I'm Erica Jong." Because as you know, she appropriates all these different writers in her novels. So she wrote basically it's a pamphlet, like a really nice chapbook called "Hello, I'm Erica Jong," which I love too. So I decided, well, I should write. My book should be called "Fear of Kathy Acker" to tie it back to the Fear of Flying.
Okay. Yeah, I thought there was some kind of connection there.
That's it. You got it.
So you had Monsters, you had the Kathy Acker, which is coming out next year or in 2023. Semiotext, same as the Chris Kraus book. Kathy Acker also published on that press, and so let's get to the music. Okay, so Lawndale, I just listened to a lot of it this past week. It's it's kind of like a weird kind of surf band. It's like I remember going to the Starwood once, and the Go-Go's opened up for the Ventures and stuff. So it seemed like Lawndale could have been on that bill too.
Right.
So the Ventures, the Shadows, but it's kind of like this weird kind of something else going on with the Lawndale, and then you're kind of connected to SST, which doesn't really make sense. Like how did you meet Greg Ginn and all those guys?
I know, it's so funny. Well, I mean, okay, so you're referencing some classic like surf or instrumental band like the Shadows and Ventures. Lawndale is an all-instrumental band. There are no lyrics. Don't ask me why, since I'm a writer. There are no lyrics. The concept originally, and still is, kind of like to make fun of musical genres, instrumental musical genres. So there's surf rock, there's country, there's jazz, there's metal, there's lounge music, but since it's very heavy reverb guitar, it kind of all sounds kind of surfy. But we definitely try to take it into other like you said, weird directions. We have some very bizarre songs too. So, but yes, we were on SST Records. Again, this is going back to the 80s. It had two albums on SST, and you're right, it doesn't make sense that we're on SST. But this was at a time when SST was like, people didn't know XST, SST, released Black Flag, Husker Du, the Minutemen, Sonic Youth, Meat Puppets, some great bands, international bands, as well as a lot of local ones. So we were on that label. It was a great experience. I mean, we loved playing with all those guys all the time, and we still do, and we're still together. So it's, again, they don't exist anymore, but their influence lives on.
Yeah, but you find out later. I mean, like SST. I mean, they put out the Opal record, which became Mazzy Star, and
right,
and they and then you find out later Greg Ginn was kind of a pothead and a deadhead, and he liked psychedelic music. He liked different things, like they kind of they did try to do other stuff than just hardcore music, or
they definitely tried to branch out after a while. Yes,
and so Lawndale. So you got the Kathy Acker book coming out. Is Lawndale gonna put out records or play shows?
Yeah, we just finished recording 8 songs, so we have a new album. It sounds really good. I'm really happy with how it came out. We're shopping labels right now. We have 2 labels that are interested, but if that takes too long or whatever, we'll just put it out ourselves. And we'll start gigging again soon too.
Right. Well, there was that one place in Santa Monica where you were playing and stuff. What was it?
Yeah, our drummer Dave Childs, for a long time he owned the Liquid Kitty Bar on Pico.
Oh, okay.
And so we would have the punk rock barbecue there about every 2-3 months. Free shows in the afternoon on Sundays. And Dave Childs produced all those shows. And then they moved them to the Harvelle, which is another great venue in Santa Monica. So maybe that's what you're referring to. So the punk rock barbecues are going to start up again too. So expect us to play there. In fact, we've even been jamming with Joe Baiza, who he was the guitar player for Saccharine Trust, which was a big one of those big SST bands, and lots of other bands he's played with, his own band. Yeah. So the Mechalodiacs and stuff like that. So he is jamming with us now. So you might even see him next time we play.
Right. And
Joe Baiza. Yeah.
Yeah, Joe Baiza with Lawndale. Who else is in Lawndale? It's you? Is it Rick Lawndale's in the band?
No, Rick's no longer in the band. He hasn't been in for a while, but we kept his namesake. It's myself, Dave Childs on drums. Now Philo, who's played with lots of SST bands, another Phil Van Dyne, Philo, lots of different groups he's in and has played with, and now it looks like Baiza will jam out with us soon.
Who recorded the original SST records? Was that like the usual thing with like Mugger and all those guys, or who did that?
Our records were recorded at Radio Tokyo Studios in Venice.
Okay, so it was a total different studio and production.
Yeah. But Ethan James was the guy that ran that shop, so you could say that he was kind of like the producer, I guess. I don't know.
Okay, so I have this list of the best books of 2021, The Portable Infinite 35, and I have your book and Jack Skelley. Your book and Dennis Cooper's book, I Wished, and your book is Dennis Wilson and Charlie Manson, and it's a short book, but it seems longer, and it's like written in a lot of different styles, and it definitely evokes the time, and it's not. I don't think it's a sentimental book at all, and what's your take on some of the Dennis Wilson solo stuff? I think the '70s and stuff, because he never really gets much of a fair shake in the whole Beach Boys universe and stuff. There's a lot of 90% of it's about Brian Wilson and a little bit about the dad, and then Dennis Wilson, he kind of he put out these like Tom Waits type records in the 70s. Have you ever listened to any of that stuff?
Well, the one I listened to a lot is Pacific Ocean Blue, which was his own songs, and he produced it. But he had help from some of the Beach Boys, but it was definitely him. It sounded like him, not really like the Beach Boys. It's a great album.
Yeah, he had. He did that movie Two Lane Blacktop.
Right.
He did all this kind of stuff that was almost like Tom Waits, Waitsian almost. And
I don't know that stuff.
Oh yeah, well I'll send you a couple tracks.
Yeah.
He definitely did some of that. But your book, this is like it's really. I find it, find it really fresh and really, exciting to read, and is like really looking forward to it. When I got it, I read it like in one day. And when did you write this? And what was your intention there? Like why Dennis Wilson? Why Charlie Manson again?
This book had been gestating in my mind for a year or a couple years now, and it follows on the path of a similar sort of set of fictional vignettes I wrote about Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones about 10 years ago. So I wanted to kind of do that again with Dennis Wilson and Charlie Manson, because the story is just so great. It's a tragedy, like the Brian Jones story. And yet here was in our own backyard, right? You talk about people's run-ins with celebrities and everything. Dennis Wilson was one of them, and Charlie Manson was one of them. So it's just, people don't know really that story very well, the relationship that they had together and how it really kind of led to the murders, the Manson murders, the relationship between Dennis and Manson.
And just to remind people, you grew up like very close to like Hawthorne, where the Beach Boys are from, right?
Yes.
And were there any other icons or celebrities that we like? As I mentioned, because Denny Butch and Willie Ames were people that I were familiar with back when I was like 10 years old.
Yeah.
Did you know any of those people, or?
I didn't know. I don't know. I don't know why. I just don't know. I didn't know celebrities then. I get all my celebrity interactions secondhand mostly.
Yeah, I didn't even know. I didn't even know they were celebrities. I mean, I just thought,
right.
When I found out more later, that.
Yeah.
But I know that's an LA thing, though. It's like it
is. I guess I should know more, or have known more, or whatever. But I'll tell you this. I think I put this in the book. I'm not sure, the Dennis Wilson book, but I lived in Venice at the same time that Dennis Wilson lived in Venice. And I literally know 3 different people who had car accidents with Dennis Wilson because he was such a freaking loadie.
All right.
He's destroyed more expensive cars than anybody in the world.
Well, where was he? Where was he living? Like Laurel Canyon or Topanga Canyon? Or
well, at that time he lived in Venice. So
right.
What I'm talking about.
Oh, right. Yeah.
But he also famously had his house in Santa Monica Canyon. That was they called the log cabin. Right. That's where he met Charles Manson.
Okay. So
that was in the 60s.
So yeah, people. This is one of my favorite books of the year. It's definitely up there with Dennis Cooper and.
Oh man, thank you. That Dennis Cooper book is amazing.
And the John Lurie book is great, and this Jack Skelley book. People definitely check this out. I mean, what after? Okay, so there's a lot of activity going on in the Jack Skelley world. There's like the Hammer Museum stuff. There's this book. There's Lawndale. What are we going to see in the future? And the Kathy Acker book is coming out. We've mentioned that. What there's like you got an essay coming out soon?
I'm working. Yeah, this month, Los Angeles Review of Books, LARB, will publish a essay I wrote. The nominal title right now is "The Descent of Autofiction and the Rise of the Literary Thrill-Seeking Industrial Complex," or something like that. And it's trying to show how, again, people like Kathy Acker, to some degree Dennis Cooper, who's kind of been forerunner of this new narrative stuff, have influenced now a whole new generation. So I'm looking at 9 or 10 books that come out in the last year or so, and I write little mini reviews on them and try to link them up to sort of the forerunners such as Kathy Acker. The premise of the essay is that autofiction, which is a term everybody uses, is not really an accurate term at all. It's really a misnomer, kind of, but it's interesting to try to figure out why.
Well, I guess they're trying to say autobiography and fiction and mix it into one.
Yeah. And so if you read Kathy, I mean, she definitely does that, right? You don't know, hey, who is this I that's speaking? Who is the Kathy even? Is that really her? Or is that just thing she just ripped out of other, which it is. She just totally takes things out of, appropriates other texts, stuff like that. So people got inspired by that, but the way it results in today's writing, I don't think it's quite the same.
And there's going to be a new kind of poetry loves poetry type book coming out soon, or Dennis Cooper anthology.
Well, there's going to be myself and David Trinidad, who was from that era, the early Beyond Baroque era again. We're working on an anthology of writing from that time. So that would basically, the nominal title of that right now is The Gang, which was the term that Dennis used to kind of describe the people he gathered around him.
Okay. Well, is there any other books or bands that you like? I'm know that you went to that Tame Impala at the Hollywood Bowl a couple weeks ago. What other stuff do you like, and new books can you recommend?
Oh man, yeah, I know. I love your show too. You have great stuff on there. I mean, I don't know. There's so many to talk about. So many things, so much music. I'll say that some of the names in this article, the books in this article I'm writing, include a writer named Stephanie LaCava, who's written a really cool book called The Super Rationals. This really hilarious writer named, you would like this, Alex, Meg McCarville, and she's got a book on amphetamine sulfate, which is a great press, called Four Circles. She is so funny. She has just these low-life tales in all these different cities and all the shit that happens to her. It's really great. And there's a writer named Thomas Moore, who's written sort of more in the Dennis Cooper vein. He's an English writer. He's really good, too. There's a writer named Karina Bush, who wrote this crazy-ass book called Fourth Industrial Revolution Slut. Wow. It's just really funny. I wrote a piece on that for Dennis Cooper's blog. So there's a lot of good writing happening right now, for sure.
Yeah, I was looking on one of the things. You're also the list you made for. There's a Jack Skelley Spotify list that's really good in early '80s music with Suburban Lawns and the Buzzcocks and all those bands and stuff. That's really good. So
that playlist is from the Sabrina Tarasoff art installation, Walk Through Haunted House, called Beyond Baroque. And that playlist plays throughout the exhibit, but especially in what we call the punk rock hallway, which is this part of the haunted house, which is full of all these punk rock flyers and stuff from that era, reading, music, literary flyers and stuff like that. And so that music was from that time. Sabrina asked me to do that playlist.
So we'll add a lot of these links with this interview when it's on Mixcloud and YouTube. Well, in that Spotify list. Is there any other where if people want to get your books and follow your activity, where should they go to Instagram, or is there...
Instagram's the best clearinghouse. Then I have a link tree or whatever in my bio, which links to all the most recent stories.
So that's Helter Skelley at how do you spell it?
Helter Skelley.
Helter Skelley at Instagram and stuff, and you have a link tree to the press and
all kinds of stuff.
A lot of the stuff that we're talking about. And so,
the book the Dennis Wilson Charlie Manson book is available widely, so it's in all the cool bookstores in LA. But you can order it. You don't have to go to Amazon to order it. You can order it from any of the other definitely best evil distributors, and it's available, or you can get it from me too. If you write to me through Instagram or whatever, I'll sign one.
So we're coming to the end of this. So I'm going to play a Lawndale song. Which song should I play for a Lawndale song?
I can send you a new one.
Oh, really? Okay, we'll play it right now.
No, I can't play it right. I can't send it. Well, I could.
Something I could get from YouTube or something. Which song's a good?
Well, you're gonna have to look for it anyway, right?
Yeah.
So let me send you one of the new ones. But it's called. This is actually an old one, but we re-recorded it.
Okay.
And we're gonna do a video of it. It's called "The Story of Vanna White."
Okay. Right? Okay. So we're gonna be listening to that next, and so this is Book Talk. This is Alexander Lawrence from the Portable Infinite, and we just talked to Jack Skelley. It's been a great talk. It's almost an hour long now, but we're gonna have the song. Thanks for talking to us, Jack. We'll talk to you again in the future, and when some of these other books come out, we'll revisit and we'll do another one, and we'll see you in the real world sometime.
Great to reconnect with you, Alexander.
Okay. All right, that was Lawndale, The Days of Pup and Taco, 1986. The Days of Pup and Taco it's taken from their Lawndale's Beyond Barbecue album on SST Records, 1986. I mean, next year we're gonna play. Like Jack's gonna send me a bunch of tracks from the new stuff. I'll play that in the first show. of 2022. So we'll look forward to that. So I'm going to add a bunch of links, and you'll get to see all the, definitely go to see Jack Skelley, Helter Skelley on Instagram, and you can find his book, and I'll add a bunch of links. I already did on the YouTube video I already put up, and this is probably going to go out December 15th, so, and we're going to have some more book talks during the winter months. So thanks for listening. I'm going to be on regular KAJW on Fridays, 3 p.m. And we're going to talk to Jack Skelley probably again. I don't know who's coming up next. Maybe some more poets from the 80s. Okay, thanks for listening.